The auctioneer's hammer fell like a death knell on the courthouse steps in Kingfisher, Oklahoma Territory, and Alina Rose felt her grandmother's weathered hand tighten around her own as the crowd of rough men pressed closer, their eyes calculating and cold in the harsh August sun of 1893. "Lot 17, the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying over the dusty main street where wagons and horses stood waiting. Two women, able-bodied. The younger one can cook, clean, and handle livestock. The older one's got midwife skills, starting bid at $50 for the pair." Alina's cheeks burned with humiliation as the men shouted their bids, treating them like cattle at market. Her grandmother, Martha Rose, stood straight-backed beside her despite her 70 years, refusing to show weakness even as their world crumbled around them. The bank had taken everything after Alina's father died in a farming accident 3 months prior, leaving debts that Alina and Martha could never hope to repay. The law in these parts was unforgiving, and indentured servitude was still legal in the territory for those who owed more than they owned. $60, called out a tobacco-stained merchant who ran the general store. 70, countered a ranch hand with mean eyes and a reputation for cruelty. Alina felt sick. She was 22 years old, and this was not how she imagined her life would turn out. She had dreams once of falling in love with a good man, of having a home and children, of growing old surrounded by family. Now those dreams felt as distant as the mountains that rose purple and hazy on the western horizon. $100. The new voice cut through the crowd like a knife, deep and authoritative. Alina's eyes snapped up to find the source. A tall man stood at the edge of the gathering, his dark hat pulled low over his face. He wore a well-made shirt and denim trousers, with a gun belt slung low on his hips. But it was his bearing that set him apart from the other men, a quiet confidence that suggested he was used to being obeyed. $100 for both, the man repeated, stepping forward into the light. Alina caught her breath. He was perhaps 30 years old, with strong features bronzed by the sun, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of storm clouds. A scar ran along his left jaw, giving him a dangerous edge, but his expression was unreadable. The auctioneer looked around, clearly hoping for a higher bid, but the stranger's presence seemed to have a dampening effect on the crowd. Men shuffled their feet and looked away, and Alina realized that this man commanded respect, perhaps even fear. Going once, going twice, sold to Samuel Irving for $100. Samuel Irving counted out the money with deliberate movements, then turned to face Alina and Martha. His eyes met Alina's, and she saw something flicker in their depths. Not the lecherous interest she had seen in the other men, but something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or sympathy. "Both of you come with me," he said simply, his voice gentler now. He gestured toward a well-maintained wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. Martha squeezed Alina's hand, and together they walked toward their new fate. Alina carried their one remaining bag, which contained all their worldly possessions. 2 changes of clothes, Martha's Bible, and Alina's mother's silver locket. Everything else had been sold to pay the debts. Samuel helped Martha into the wagon first, his touch careful and respectful, then offered his hand to Alina. She hesitated for just a moment, her pride warring with necessity, then accepted his assistance. His hand was calloused and warm, his grip firm but not bruising. As she settled onto the wagon seat, she caught the scent of leather and sage, clean and masculine. He climbed up beside them and took the reins without a word, guiding the horses out of town. Alina sat rigid between him and her grandmother, acutely aware of his presence, of the way his shoulder nearly brushed hers with each movement. She wanted to ask where he was taking them, what he expected of them, but her throat felt tight with unshed tears and wounded dignity. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, the town falling away behind them as they traveled west across the rolling prairie. The land here was beautiful in its starkness, golden grass waving in the hot breeze, interrupted by stands of cottonwood trees along the creek beds. Hawks circled overhead, and in the distance, a herd of pronghorn antelope grazed peacefully. Finally, they crested a ridge and Alina saw their destination. A ranch spread out in the valley below, more prosperous than she had expected. A large two-story house stood at the center, its white paint gleaming in the sun. A substantial barn, several corrals, and various outbuildings completed the compound. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, hundreds of them, maybe more. "This is the Irving Ranch," Samuel said, speaking for the first time since they left town. "I run it alone since my father passed last winter. Could use help managing the house and with the work." Alina found her voice. "What exactly do you expect from us?" He glanced at her, and she saw understanding in his eyes. "Honest work for honest pay. Your grandmother can help with the cooking and preserving. I understand she has midwife skills and several families in the area could use her services. You can manage the house, the garden, and help with the lighter ranch work if you are willing. In return, you will have room, board, and wages. After you have worked off the debt I paid today, you will be free to go or stay as you choose." Martha spoke up, her voice sharp with suspicion born of hard experience. "And what else?" Samuel's jaw tightened. "Nothing else, madam. I am not that kind of man. You will each have your own room with a lock on the door. I give you my word that you will be safe here." Alina studied his profile, trying to determine if he was telling the truth. She had learned the hard way that men's words were often as empty as the wind, but something in his bearing suggested honor. Or perhaps she was just desperate to believe him. They reached the house, and Samuel helped them down from the wagon. Up close, the house was even more impressive, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side, complete with rocking chairs and hanging baskets that held dead plants. "I am afraid the house has been neglected since my mother died 5 years ago," Samuel admitted, a hint of embarrassment in his voice. "My father did his best, but neither of us had much talent for keeping things nice." He led them inside, and Alina's trained eye immediately cataloged the work that needed doing. Dust covered every surface, dishes were piled in the kitchen, and the windows were so dirty they barely let in light. But beneath the neglect, she could see quality. Good furniture, fine curtains, a beautiful stone fireplace in the parlor. "The bedrooms are upstairs," Samuel said, carrying their bag. "I will give you the two on the east side. They catch the morning sun and are the furthest from my room." Alina appreciated the consideration, even as she felt a strange flutter in her chest. She followed him up the stairs, Martha close behind, and he showed them to 2 spacious rooms connected by a shared door. Each had a bed, a wardrobe, a dresser, and a washstand. The furniture was heavy and well made, if dusty. "I will let you get settled," Samuel said, setting down their bag. "Come down when you are ready and we can discuss the arrangements in more detail. There is a pump in the kitchen for water, and I will bring in more wood for the stove." After he left, Alina and Martha stood in silence for a moment. Then Martha sat heavily on one of the beds, her facade of strength finally cracking. "Oh, Alina," she whispered, and her granddaughter rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around the older woman's thin shoulders. "We are going to be all right," Alina said, trying to convince herself as much as Martha. "He seems decent, and this is better than I feared." "Your father would be heartbroken if he knew what has become of us," Martha said, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Father would want us to survive," Alina said firmly. That is what we are going to do. We will work hard, save our wages, and in time, we will be independent again." But even as she spoke the brave words, Alina felt the weight of their circumstances. They were alone in the world, dependent on the charity of a stranger, with no real recourse if he proved false. All they could do was trust and work and hope. After washing their faces and changing into their other dresses, they ventured downstairs. Samuel was in the kitchen, attempting to make coffee and failing, judging by the cursing Alina heard as they approached. "Let me," Alina said, stepping forward. "You will burn the grounds if you heat it that much." Samuel stepped back, looking relieved. "I confess, cooking is not my strong suit. I have been living on beans and bacon for months." Alina set about making proper coffee, while Martha began assessing the kitchen. The pantry was surprisingly well stocked with basics: flour, cornmeal, salt, dried beans, bacon, and even some preserved vegetables in jars. "You have supplies," Martha observed. "That is good. We can make a proper supper." "I would be grateful," Samuel said. "I have forgotten what proper food tastes like." As Alina worked, she found herself sneaking glances at Samuel. He had removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that fell across his forehead. His face was strong-jawed and handsome, despite the scar. When he caught her looking, she quickly turned away, her cheeks flushing. They settled into an uneasy rhythm over the next few days. Alina threw herself into cleaning the house, scrubbing years of neglect from every corner. Martha worked in the kitchen, preparing meals that made Samuel's face light up with genuine pleasure. He worked the ranch from dawn until dusk, coming in exhausted and dusty, but always polite, always respectful. Alina learned that Samuel had inherited the ranch from his father, who had built it from nothing over 30 years. Samuel had an older brother who had gone east to become a lawyer and wanted nothing to do with ranching. His mother had died of pneumonia, and his father had followed her in grief just months later, leaving Samuel alone with 3,000 acres and 500 head of cattle. "It is too much for one man," Samuel admitted one evening over supper. "I have been trying to manage, but things have been slipping. I need to hire more hands before the fall gather, but I needed help with the house first." "You could have hired a housekeeper for less than you paid for us," Alina pointed out, then immediately regretted her boldness. But Samuel did not seem offended. He met her eyes directly. "The merchant who was bidding on you, he is known for mistreating his workers, and that ranch hand, he is worse. I could not let either of you go to them." Alina felt something warm unfold in her chest. "So you bought us out of kindness." "I bought you because it was the right thing to do," Samuel said simply. "And because I genuinely needed help. It seemed a situation that could benefit all of us." Martha smiled, the first real smile Alina had seen from her since her father died. "You are a good man, Samuel Irving." A flush crept up Samuel's neck. "I try to be, madam." As the weeks passed, the house transformed under Alina's care. Windows sparkled, floors shone, and the rooms smelled of beeswax and lemon oil instead of dust and neglect. Martha's cooking put meat on Samuel's bones and brought color back to his sun-weathered face. The dead plants on the porch were replaced with thriving flowers that Alina had transplanted from wild stock along the creek. Alina found herself watching for Samuel's return each evening, her heart lifting when she spotted his tall figure riding in from the range. He always stopped at the pump to wash before coming inside, and she would catch glimpses of him through the kitchen window, his shirt sleeves rolled up, water streaming over his muscled forearms as he scrubbed away the day's work. She tried to tell herself it was simple appreciation for his kindness, but her racing pulse suggested otherwise. At night, alone in her room, she would remember the timbre of his voice, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the gentle way he had helped Martha down from the wagon that first day. Samuel seemed to be suffering from similar confusion. Alina would catch him watching her as she worked, his gray eyes following her movements with an intensity that made her breath catch. But he never said anything inappropriate, never touched her beyond what was necessary, maintaining the respectful distance he had promised. One morning in early September, Martha approached Alina as she was hanging laundry on the line behind the house. "That man is falling in love with you," Martha said without preamble. Alina nearly dropped the shirt she was holding. "Grandmother, do not be ridiculous. He is just grateful for the help. I have been alive 70 years, child. I know what I see, and I see a man who looks at you like you hung the moon and stars." Martha paused, her expression softening. "I also see a young woman who returns that look when she thinks no one is watching." Alina felt tears prick her eyes. "It does not matter. We are indentured to him. Any relationship would be built on unequal ground. It would not be right." "Then we should discuss paying off our debt," Martha said practically. "He has been paying us wages, fair wages. We have almost enough saved between us." That evening after supper, Martha broached the subject. "Samuel, we need to discuss the terms of our arrangement." Samuel looked up from the account books he had been studying. "Of course. What troubles you?" "Nothing troubles us," Martha assured him. "You have been more than fair. But Alina and I have calculated what you paid for us, plus interest, and we have nearly earned it back through our wages. We would like to settle the debt." Something flickered across Samuel's face, an emotion Alina could not quite read. "I see. And once the debt is settled, you plan to leave." "We plan to be free," Martha said gently. "What we do with that freedom remains to be seen." Samuel nodded slowly. "I understand. Yes, by my calculations, you are correct. By the end of this month, your debt will be cleared. At that point, you are free to go, though I hope you will consider staying on as paid employees. I have come to depend on you both." His eyes found Alina's across the table, and the longing in them made her heart ache. But he said nothing more, just returned to his account books with a stiff formality that had been absent for weeks. The atmosphere in the house changed after that conversation. A tension hummed between Samuel and Alina, unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. They were careful not to be alone together, as if both feared what might be said if the barriers finally fell. Martha watched them dance around each other with barely concealed exasperation. Finally, she took matters into her own hands. One Saturday evening, she announced that she had been invited to stay overnight with the Johnson family 10 miles south, where she had helped deliver a baby the week before. "The mother is having some difficulties, and they have requested my assistance," Martha explained. "Samuel, would you be willing to drive me there tomorrow morning and collect me the following day?" "Of course," Samuel agreed immediately. "We can leave right after breakfast." "Actually," Martha said, her tone innocent, "my old bones ache something terrible after a wagon ride. Perhaps it would be better if Alina drove me. She has a gentler hand with the reins." Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly, and Alina suspected he saw through her grandmother's transparent scheming. But he nodded. "That makes sense. I have work to do here anyway. Alina can take the wagon." The next morning, Alina helped her grandmother into the wagon, then leaned close. "You are not being subtle," she whispered. Martha's eyes twinkled. "At my age, I have no time for subtle. You two need to talk, really talk, without me chaperoning. Do not waste this opportunity, child." Alina drove to the Johnson ranch, her mind churning with possibilities and fears. By the time she returned home that evening, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She found Samuel on the porch, waiting. "Is Martha settled?" he asked, standing as she climbed down from the wagon. Yes, Mrs. Johnson is doing better already. Grandmother has such a gift for healing. Alina busied herself unhitching the horses, aware of Samuel watching her. "Let me help," he said, moving to her side. His shoulder brushed hers as he worked, and Alina felt the contact like an electric shock. They worked in silence, leading the horses to the barn and settling them for the night. The barn was dim and warm, smelling of hay and horses. Golden light from the setting sun streamed through the gaps in the walls, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. "Alina," Samuel said softly, and the way he spoke her name made her still. "I need to tell you something." She turned to face him, her heart pounding. He stood close, closer than propriety allowed, his gray eyes intense in the fading light. "I know your debt is nearly paid," he continued. "I know you will be free to leave, but I need you to know that these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Not because my house is clean or my meals are good, though I appreciate those things, but because you are here, because I get to see your smile, hear your voice, watch you bring life back to this place." Alina's breath caught. "Samuel, let me finish," he said urgently. "I know the circumstances of how you came here were not ideal. I know you might resent being bought like property, and I would not blame you. But somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." Alina rose, deeply, irrevocably in love. "And I needed you to know before you decide whether to stay or go." Alina felt tears stream down her face. "You foolish man," she whispered. "Do you think I worked so hard to pay off that debt out of a desire to leave? I did it so that if I stayed, it would be as a free woman, making a free choice. Because I have fallen in love with you too, and I could not bear for there to be any hint of obligation between us." Samuel's face transformed, wonder and joy erasing the worry that had etched lines around his eyes. "You love me," hopelessly, Alina confirmed, laughing through her tears. "You are everything I did not dare hope for. Kind, honorable, hardworking. You treated my grandmother and me with respect when you had no obligation to do so. You gave us dignity when the world would have taken it away. How could I not love you?" Samuel reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "May I kiss you, please?" Alina breathed. His lips met hers softly, tentatively, as if she were something precious that might break. But Alina was not fragile. She pressed closer, her arms wrapping around his neck, kissing him with all the pent-up longing of the past weeks. Samuel groaned and pulled her tight against him, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. When they finally broke apart, both were shaking. Samuel rested his forehead against hers, his hands gentle on her waist. "Marry me," he said. "Not because of any debt or obligation, but because I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy. Marry me, Alina." "Yes," Alina said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They stood in the barn holding each other as the sun set completely and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Alina felt a peace she had not known in months, maybe years. This was where she was meant to be, in the arms of this good man, building a future together. When they finally made their way back to the house, they were holding hands, and neither seemed inclined to let go. They sat on the porch in the rocking chairs, talking late into the night about their plans and dreams. Samuel wanted to expand the ranch, build it into something that would last for generations. Alina wanted a garden full of vegetables and flowers, and children, lots of children to fill the big house with laughter. "How many children?" Samuel asked, amusement in his voice. "At least 4, Alina said decisively. "I was an only child and it was lonely. I want our children to have siblings." 4 sounds perfect, Samuel agreed, "though we should probably get married first." Alina laughed. "Probably wise." When Martha returned the next afternoon, she took one look at their glowing faces and clasped her hands together in delight. Finally, I was beginning to think I would have to lock you in a room together. You are not subtle at all, are you? Samuel asked, grinning. Not even a little bit, Martha confirmed. Now, when is the wedding? We have much to plan. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Kingfisher, the same town where Alina and Martha had been auctioned. It felt right somehow, coming full circle. The church was packed with Samuel's friends and neighbors, many of whom had come to know and respect Martha and Alina in the weeks since their arrival. Alina wore a dress that Martha had sewn from fabric Samuel had bought in town, a simple but elegant creation in cream-colored muslin with lace at the collar and cuffs. Martha had woven wildflowers into Alina's hair, and she had never felt more beautiful. Samuel stood at the altar in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his gray eyes bright with emotion. When Alina walked down the aisle on Martha's arm, his face filled with such love that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They spoke their vows in clear, strong voices, promising to love and honor each other through all the days of their lives. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed Alina with a tenderness that made her weak in the knees. The whole town turned out for the celebration afterward. Tables laden with food were set up in the churchyard, and someone produced a fiddle. Samuel whirled Alina around in dance after dance, both of them grinning like fools, while Martha watched with tears of joy streaming down her face. As the sun began to set, Samuel and Alina slipped away from the celebration, riding back to the ranch in the wagon, eager to begin their life together. Martha would stay in town with friends for the night, giving the newlyweds privacy. The house was quiet when they arrived, lamplight glowing warmly in the windows. Samuel helped Alina down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "I believe there is a tradition about carrying the bride over the threshold," he said, his voice husky. Alina laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck as he carried her into their home. He set her down gently in the parlor, and they stood looking at each other, suddenly shy despite all their earlier declarations of love. "I never thought I could be this happy," Alina whispered. "Just a few months ago I thought my life was over. And now you are stuck with me," Samuel finished, pulling her close. "I cannot think of anywhere I would rather be stuck," Alina said, rising on her toes to kiss him. Samuel returned the kiss with mounting passion, his hands gentle but insistent as he pulled her toward the stairs. Alina went willingly, her heart racing with anticipation and only the slightest flutter of nervousness. This was her husband, the man she loved, and she trusted him completely. Their wedding night was everything Alina had hoped for and more. Samuel was patient and tender, taking his time to ensure her comfort and pleasure. He whispered words of love against her skin, and Alina felt cherished in a way she had never experienced. When they finally came together as husband and wife, it was with a sense of rightness that brought tears to both their eyes. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Samuel's bed, which was now their bed, talking quietly in the darkness. Samuel traced lazy patterns on Alina's shoulder, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I want to tell you something," Samuel said, "about why I bid on you and Martha that day." Alina propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "I thought you said it was because it was the right thing to do." "It was," Samuel confirmed, "but there was more. When I saw you standing on those courthouse steps, so proud and brave despite everything, I felt something I had never felt before. Recognition, maybe. Like I had been waiting for you without knowing it. And when I saw those other men looking at you like you were property to be used, I knew I had to act." Alina felt her eyes sting with tears. "I was so scared that day. But when you spoke up, when you looked at me with kindness instead of calculation, I felt hope for the first time in weeks." "I am glad I was there," Samuel said simply. "I am glad I could help, and I am grateful beyond measure that you chose to stay, that you chose me." "Always," Alina promised. "I will always choose you." The months that followed were some of the happiest of Alina's life. She and Samuel settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked side by side, building the ranch into something even more prosperous. Samuel hired 2 ranch hands to help with the cattle, which freed him up to spend more time with Alina. Martha thrived in her new role as the ranch matriarch, delivering babies throughout the county and becoming known as a healer of great skill. The money she earned, she saved carefully, planning for her eventual retirement, though Alina could not imagine her grandmother ever truly stopping. Winter came, bringing snow that blanketed the prairie in white and forced everyone indoors. Samuel and Alina spent long evenings by the fire, reading, talking, and planning for the future. On especially cold nights, Samuel would play the guitar that had belonged to his father, singing old songs in a surprisingly good baritone while Alina and Martha listened. It was during one of these cozy evenings in January that Alina realized she had missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely, but when another month passed, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant. Alina told Martha first, needing her grandmother's confirmation and wisdom. Martha examined her gently, then pulled her into a fierce hug. "A baby," Martha breathed. "Oh, Alina, this is wonderful news." "I am terrified," Alina admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if I am not a good mother?" "You will be an excellent mother," Martha said firmly. "And I will be here to help you every step of the way. Now, when are you going to tell that husband of yours? The poor man has been looking at you like a lovesick puppy for days." Alina laughed through her nervous tears. "Tonight. I will tell him tonight." She prepared Samuel's favorite meal and wore her best dress. When he came in from the cold, stamping snow from his boots, his face lit up at the sight of her. "What is the occasion?" he asked, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that still made her toes curl after months of marriage. "Sit down," Alina said, suddenly nervous. "I have something to tell you." Samuel's expression shifted to concern. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Everything is right, actually." Alina took a deep breath. "Samuel, I am with child. You are going to be a father." Samuel froze, his eyes going wide. Then his face broke into the biggest smile Alina had ever seen. He let out a whoop of joy and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the kitchen. "A baby." "We are having a baby." He set her down carefully, as if she were suddenly made of glass. "Are you all right? Should you be on your feet? Do you need to sit down?" Alina laughed at his sudden nervousness. "I am fine. Women have been having babies since the dawn of time. I am healthy and strong, and I have the best midwife in the territory right here in the house." Samuel pulled her close again, more gently this time, and rested his hand on her still flat stomach. "Our child," he said wonderingly. "A piece of you and me growing right here. It is a miracle." "A miracle," Alina agreed, covering his hand with hers. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Alina experienced some morning sickness in the early months, but Martha's herbal teas helped, and by her 4th month she felt better than ever. Her body changed, her belly swelling with their growing child, and Samuel treated her like she was made of spun glass. "I am not going to break," Alina protested one evening when Samuel tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know, but let me help anyway," Samuel said. "I cannot carry the baby for you, so let me do everything else." His devotion touched her deeply. As summer approached and her belly grew round and heavy, Samuel would rub her aching back and swollen feet each evening, his touch gentle and loving. In late July, as the heat of the prairie summer reached its peak, Alina woke in the middle of the night with a cramping pain low in her belly. She lay still for a moment, recognizing what it meant, then gently shook Samuel awake. "It is time," she said simply. Samuel shot up like he had been struck by lightning. "Time, the baby. Now. But it is not supposed to come for another 2 weeks. Babies come when they are ready," Alina said, breathing through another contraction. "Go get grandmother." What followed was the longest night of Samuel's life. He paced the hallway outside their bedroom, listening to Alina's labored breathing and occasional cries of pain, feeling utterly helpless. Martha had banished him from the room after his hovering had made Alina tense, but being separated from his wife during her ordeal was agony. Dawn was breaking when he finally heard it, the thin, furious wail of a newborn baby. Samuel's heart leaped, and moments later Martha opened the door, her face creased with a tired smile. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy with a good set of lungs, and Alina is fine." Tired, but fine. Samuel rushed into the room. Alina lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was a tiny red-faced baby with a shock of dark hair. "Meet your son," Alina said softly as Samuel approached on shaking legs. He sank onto the bed beside them, staring in wonder at the tiny life they had created. The baby was perfect, from his miniature fingers to his tiny toes. As Samuel watched, his son opened his eyes, revealing a deep blue that would probably change color in time, and yawned. "He is beautiful," Samuel said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are both beautiful. Alina, you are amazing. I cannot believe you did this." "We did this," Alina corrected, leaning into his embrace. "Together." They named him Thomas, after Samuel's father, with the middle name William after Alina's father. Little Thomas Irving was baptized a month later in the same church where his parents had married, and the whole community turned out to celebrate. Life settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. Thomas was a good baby, quick to smile and generally content, though he had a healthy appetite that kept Alina busy. Martha doted on her great-grandson, singing him old songs and telling him stories even though he was too young to understand. Samuel proved to be a devoted father. He would come in from the range and immediately wash up to hold his son, talking to Thomas about the ranch, and the cattle and everything he would teach him when he was older. The sight of her strong husband cradling their tiny baby never failed to make Alina's heart swell. 2 years passed in a blur of happiness. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's gray eyes and his mother's smile. He followed Samuel everywhere, his chubby legs pumping to keep up, chattering away in his developing language. Alina discovered she was pregnant again when Thomas was just over 2 years old. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. And in the spring of 1897, she gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Rose after Martha. Little Margaret was her grandmother's namesake in personality as well, stubborn and strong-willed from birth. Where Thomas had been an easy baby, Margaret demanded attention and made her feelings known with impressive volume. But she had Samuel wrapped around her tiny finger from the first moment he held her. "I am in trouble," Samuel told Alina, gazing down at his sleeping daughter. "How am I supposed to say no to this face?" "You will learn," Alina said with amusement. "Though I doubt you will succeed any more than you succeed at saying no to me." "I never stood a chance," Samuel agreed, pulling Alina close for a kiss. As the children grew, the ranch prospered. Samuel's hard work and good management had paid off, and the Irving Ranch became known throughout the territory as one of the finest cattle operations in Oklahoma. They hired more hands, built additional barns, and acquired more land. But success did not change Samuel. He remained the same kind, honorable man who had bid on Alina and Martha that day in Kingfisher. He treated his workers fairly, paid good wages, and was quick to help neighbors in need. Alina was proud to be his wife, proud of the life they had built together. Martha aged gracefully, though by the time Margaret turned 3, her steps had slowed and her hands trembled more than they used to. She still helped deliver babies occasionally, but more often she stayed home with the grandchildren, teaching them songs and stories and passing on her considerable wisdom. One evening in late autumn, as the family gathered for supper, Martha made an announcement. "I think it is time I stepped back from midwifing," she said. "My hands are not as steady as they were, and the nighttime calls are getting harder." Alina felt a pang of concern. Her grandmother was 78 now, and though her mind remained sharp, her body was wearing out. "That is probably wise, grandmother. You have delivered half the babies in this county. You have earned your rest." "Rest," Martha said with a snort. "I plan to spend more time with these 2 rascals," she gestured at Thomas and Margaret, "and teach them everything I know." True to her word, Martha became the children's primary teacher, instructing them in reading, writing, arithmetic, and all the practical skills she had accumulated over a lifetime. Thomas soaked up her lessons like a sponge, while Margaret questioned everything, wanting to know the why behind every fact. In 1899, when Oklahoma Territory was still growing and changing, Alina found herself pregnant for the 3rd time. She was 31 now, and this pregnancy took more of a toll on her body than the previous 2. She tired easily and suffered from terrible heartburn, but Martha assured her everything was progressing normally. In the spring of 1900, Alina went into labor early, frightening Samuel badly. But Martha was calm, having seen this many times before, and after a shorter labor than her previous 2, Alina delivered twin girls. Samuel was speechless when Martha announced he had 2 more daughters. He held one in each arm, his face a mixture of terror and overwhelming joy. "4 children," he said wonderingly. "We have 4 children, Alina." "We certainly do," Alina agreed, exhausted but happy. "What should we name them?" They named the twins Caroline and Alice. Caroline was the older by 10 minutes and the larger of the 2, with Alina's dark hair. Alice was smaller and finer-boned, with hair that was almost blonde. The twins were distinct in personality from birth. Caroline serious and observant, Alice sunny and sociable. Life with 4 children was chaotic but joyful. The house rang with laughter and the occasional squabble, the sound of running feet and childish voices. Samuel expanded the house, adding more bedrooms and a larger parlor to accommodate their growing family. Thomas, at age 5, took his role as big brother seriously, helping watch over his younger sisters with a protectiveness that reminded Alina of Samuel. Margaret, at 3, was still the wild child of the family, always into something and testing boundaries. Martha's health declined gradually over the next few years. She remained mentally sharp but needed more rest, and her eyesight began to fail. Alina cared for her tenderly, remembering all the times Martha had cared for her, determined to repay the debt of love. One warm evening in June of 1902, Martha called Alina and Samuel to her bedside. The children were asleep and the house was quiet. Martha looked peaceful, though frail, propped up on her pillows. "I want to tell you both something," Martha said, her voice soft but clear. "I am ready to go soon. Do not be sad when it happens. I have lived a good, long life, and these last years with you all have been the sweetest." "Grandmother, please do not talk that way," Alina said, tears streaming down her face. "Hush now," Martha said gently. Death is as natural as birth, and I am not afraid. I have seen my great-grandchildren grow. I have watched you build a beautiful life together. I am content." She reached out and took each of their hands. "Samuel, you are the grandson I never had. Thank you for saving us that day in Kingfisher. Thank you for loving Alina the way she deserves." "It was my honor," Samuel said, his own voice thick with emotion. "Alina, my darling girl, you are stronger than you know. You will be fine without me. You have Samuel, you have your children, and you have a good life. Be happy. That is all I ask." Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 days later, with Alina holding her hand. She was 82 years old and had lived to see her great-grandchildren flourish. The funeral was attended by dozens of families whose babies Martha had delivered, whose lives she had touched with her kindness and skill. Alina grieved deeply, but Samuel was there every step of the way, holding her when she cried, taking over her duties when the grief was too heavy, reminding her gently of Martha's last words. "Be happy. Time, as it does, healed the worst of the pain." Alina found comfort in her children and in the daily rhythms of ranch life. She taught the children the songs Martha had taught her, the stories and wisdom, keeping her grandmother's memory alive. The children grew like wildflowers on the prairie, strong and resilient. Thomas became Samuel's shadow, learning everything about running the ranch. He was a natural horseman and had his father's talent for understanding cattle. By the time he was 12, Samuel trusted him with real responsibilities, and Thomas rose to the challenge. Margaret, true to her nature, insisted on learning everything her brother learned. She could ride as well as any boy, shoot a rifle with deadly accuracy, and had no patience for traditional female limitations. Alina and Samuel decided not to fight her nature, instead channeling her fierce spirit into constructive pursuits. The twins, Caroline and Alice, were inseparable and very different from their older siblings. They were more interested in books and music than ranching, spending hours reading everything they could get their hands on. Samuel built them a piano when they turned 8, and both showed considerable talent. In 1907, Oklahoma became a state, and the Irving family attended the celebrations in Guthrie, the capital. Thomas, now 14, was fascinated by the political process and peppered every official he met with questions. Margaret, at 12, was more interested in the new automobiles that were beginning to appear on the streets. The twins, at 7, were simply excited to see so many people in one place. Alina stood with Samuel watching their children explore the festivities, and she felt a deep contentment. They had come so far from that terrible day on the courthouse steps in Kingfisher. They had built a life beyond her wildest dreams, full of love and laughter and purpose. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "That I would not change a single thing," Alina said honestly. "Even the hard parts led us here to this moment, to this life. I am grateful for all of it." Samuel pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I fall in love with you more every day. Did you know that?" "I might have noticed," Alina said with a smile, "since you tell me at least twice a day." "Only twice. I must be slipping," Samuel teased. As the years continued to pass, the Irving Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the new state. Samuel's reputation for honesty and fairness meant he never lacked for good workers or business opportunities. But he never let success go to his head, remaining grounded in the values his parents had instilled. Thomas grew into a fine young man, graduating from high school and choosing to stay on the ranch rather than pursue college. At 19, he married a neighboring rancher's daughter, a sensible girl named Mary who could ride and rope as well as any man. They built a house on the far side of the Irving property, and Thomas took over more and more of the daily ranch management, freeing Samuel to focus on the business and expansion side of things. Margaret, to no one's surprise, did not marry young. She went to the new state university in Norman, studying agriculture and livestock management, one of only a handful of women in her program. She graduated at the top of her class and returned home with innovative ideas for improving the ranch's breeding program. She eventually married at 25, choosing a quiet veterinarian who appreciated her fierce independence. The twins both became teachers, founding a school in Kingfisher that served the children of ranch families for miles around. They married brothers, farmers from a good family, and remained as inseparable in their adult lives as they had been as children. By 1920, Samuel and Alina were grandparents many times over. Thomas and Mary had given them 3 grandchildren, Margaret and her veterinarian had 2, and the twins had 5 children between them. The big house that had once been so empty now hosted regular family gatherings that filled it to bursting with noise and life. Alina, at 52, had silver threading through her dark hair, and laugh lines creased the corners of her eyes. Samuel, at 60, was still strong and active, though his dark hair had gone mostly gray. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the prairie, holding hands as they had for nearly 27 years. "Do you ever think about that day?" Alina asked one evening. "The day we met." "All the time," Samuel admitted. "I think about how different our lives would be if I had not gone into town that day, if I had not spoken up." "I think about how brave you were," Alina said. "You did not know us, had no obligation to us, but you stood up anyway. You saved us, Samuel. Not just from being bought by cruel men, but from losing hope entirely." Samuel turned to face her, his gray eyes still as intense as they had been when he was younger. "You saved me too. I was so lonely here, just going through the motions. You brought light and laughter and love into my life. You gave me a family, a purpose beyond just maintaining what my father built. You made me want to be better, do better." Alina felt tears prick her eyes, the happy kind that came from a heart too full to contain itself. "We saved each other then." "We saved each other," Samuel agreed, pulling her into his arms. They sat together as the stars came out, counting their blessings and remembering their journey. From that terrible auction block to this moment of peace and contentment, they had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs, always together, always committed to the vows they had spoken in that little church in Kingfisher. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Samuel taught his grandsons the same skills he had taught Thomas, passing on not just practical knowledge but the values of hard work, integrity, and treating people fairly. Alina taught her granddaughters to be strong, capable women who could do anything they set their minds to, just as Martha had taught her. The ranch continued to prosper, adapting to new technologies and changing times without losing the core of what made it special. When Thomas took over as primary owner in 1925, he maintained his father's policies and reputation, ensuring the Irving Ranch remained a place of opportunity and fair treatment. Samuel and Alina slowed down as they entered their 60s, content to let the younger generation take the lead while they enjoyed a well-earned rest. They traveled some, visiting California and even venturing as far as New York City, marveling at how much the world had changed since their youth. But they always returned eagerly to Oklahoma, to the ranch, to the land they loved. In 1932, Samuel fell ill. It started as a persistent cough that worsened into pneumonia. Alina nursed him devotedly, but at 72, his body could not fight off the infection. As he lay in their bed, surrounded by children and grandchildren, he reached for Alina's hand one last time. "I have loved you every day for 39 years," he whispered, his voice weak but clear. "I would not change a moment of it." "I love you too," Alina said through her tears. "Rest now, my darling. You have earned it." Samuel passed peacefully with Alina holding his hand, just as she had held Martha's years before. He was laid to rest in the family cemetery on the ranch, overlooking the land he had loved and worked his entire life. Alina grieved, but she was not bitter. She had been blessed with nearly 4 decades of love with a good man, had raised 4 children and seen numerous grandchildren grow. Samuel had given her a life beyond anything she could have imagined on that terrible day in Kingfisher. She lived on at the ranch, surrounded by family, for another 12 years. She saw the ranch continue to thrive under Thomas's management, saw her grandchildren marry and have children of their own. She became the matriarch, the keeper of family stories and history, passing on the tale of how she and Martha had been saved by a kind rancher who had become the love of her life. Alina passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1944, at the age of 76. She was buried next to Samuel, and at her request, her gravestone read, "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she chose love and it chose her back." The Irving Ranch continued for generations, each one telling the story of Samuel and Alina to their children, of how love and courage had built a legacy that lasted. The big house remained in the family, still filled with laughter and life, still sheltering generations of Irvings who were taught the values their ancestors had lived by. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the prairie wind blew just right, those who lived there swore they could see 2 figures on the porch, holding hands and watching the sunset, forever together as they had been in life. A lone rancher who had taken a chance on doing the right thing, and a brave young woman who had dared to hope for love, even in her darkest hour. Their story became legend in Kingfisher and throughout Oklahoma, told and retold as an example of how courage and compassion could change lives, how love could bloom even in the most unlikely circumstances. The auction block where Alina and Martha had stood was eventually torn down, but a historical marker was placed there, commemorating not the injustice of the system that had allowed such sales, but the triumph of the human spirit and the power of choosing kindness. The Irving Ranch stood for over a century as a testament to what Samuel and Alina had built together. Through droughts and depressions, through wars and changes, it endured because it was founded on more than just good land and hard work. It was founded on love, on the commitment 2 people had made to each other and to building something lasting and good. Their descendants continued to thrive, spreading across Oklahoma and beyond, but always maintaining ties to the ranch, to the land, to the story of how it all began. Every new generation learned about Samuel, who had spoken up when it mattered, and Alina, who had been brave enough to hope, to trust, and ultimately to love. And in the end, that was the real legacy they left behind. Not the land or the cattle or the prosperous ranch, though those were substantial, but the knowledge that choosing courage, choosing compassion, choosing love could transform not just 2 lives but generations to come. That one person standing up and doing the right thing could echo through the decades, inspiring others to do the same. The story of Samuel and Alina Irving became more than just family history. It became a reminder that even in the hardest times, even when the world seemed dark and hopeless, there was still good to be found. Still people willing to stand up and speak out, still hearts brave enough to love, still hope for better tomorrows. And so the ranch stood, the big white house gleaming in the Oklahoma sun, the porch where Samuel and Alina had sat together still solid and welcoming. The land they had loved rolled on, golden grass waving in the eternal wind, cattle grazing peacefully under endless sky. It stood as a monument to their love story, to the life they had built from the ashes of Aliner's despair and Samuel's loneliness. Their story had a happy ending, the kind that lasts long after the final chapter is written. The kind where love really does conquer all, where doing the right thing is rewarded, where families built on mutual respect and genuine affection flourish across generations. It was a story that deserved to be remembered, celebrated, and passed down, a beacon of hope in a sometimes difficult world. And on warm Oklahoma evenings, when families gathered on that old porch to watch the sunset, they would tell the story one more time. About a proud young woman and her grandmother standing on an auction block, about a lone rancher who said, "Both of you, come with me." About how those simple words changed everything, creating a love story for the ages and a legacy that would never die. The end.